My brother posted a photograph of my arm on the internet without asking me. Not the whole photograph, just the arm. From the elbow down on the left side, the side that ends now where a wrist should begin, the scar tissue smooth and deliberate looking, the way healed burns look when the body has done everything it can and then stopped. He posted it on the website for his Veterans Support Foundation with a caption about resilience and sacrifice and the cost of service that good Americans pay so others do not have to. He had taken the photograph at a family barbecue the previous summer while I was reaching for a bottle of water and not paying attention. I found out about it the same way I found out about most things Kevin did. After the fact, from someone else, when the damage was already distributed across the internet and indexed by search engines and sitting inside the browsers of strangers who had donated money to a cause that had my arm on it without my permission. My physical therapist sent me the link. She had been working with me for 2 years and knew my history and knew Kevin existed and had met him once at a clinic event. She sent the link with no message attached. Just the link, which told me everything I needed to know about what she thought of it. I clicked on it. I looked at my own arm on a stranger's charity website. Then I closed the laptop and went for a walk that lasted almost 2 hours and ended at a bench beside the river near my apartment in Richmond, Virginia, where I sat until the light changed and the temperature dropped and a man walking his dog gave me a long look that probably meant I seemed like someone who needed to be asked if I was all right. I was all right. I was also furious in a way that had nowhere immediate to go. My name is Diane Mercer. I am 39 years old. I served 11 years in the United States Army as a combat medic and later as a medical services officer. I did 2 tours in Iraq. During my second tour, in 2007, a roadside explosive device detonated approximately 4 meters from the vehicle I was riding in outside Fallujah. 3 soldiers were injured, 1 seriously. I performed field stabilization on the most critical casualty while managing my own injuries, which included burns and traumatic amputation of my left forearm below the elbow. The soldier I stabilized survived. He lives in Ohio now. He has 2 children. I know this because he sends me a card every year at Christmas with a photograph of his family inside it and no other message, which is exactly the right amount of contact, and I appreciate it enormously. After 18 months of surgeries and rehabilitation, and the particular kind of exhausting administrative work the Army requires even when you are learning to exist inside a body that has been significantly rearranged, I returned to active duty. I completed officer candidate school. I served 4 more years as a medical unit commander. I deployed again. I came home again. I did my job for as long as my job needed doing, and then I separated from the Army with an honorable discharge and a record I was satisfied with, and a left arm that ended below the elbow and did not particularly slow me down. I did not give interviews. I did not attend motivational speaking events. I did not participate in inspirational media campaigns. Not because I was ashamed of what had happened, but because what happened belonged to me, and I had not decided to share it, and that decision felt important in a way I could not always fully explain to people who did not understand it. Kevin never understood it. My brother is 4 years older than me and has spent most of his adult life looking for a project that would stick. That is not a cruel description. It is just accurate. He is genuinely enthusiastic, genuinely motivated, and genuinely incapable of sustaining the kind of long, difficult attention that real work requires. In our childhood, he was the one who started building things and lost interest before they were finished. Birdhouses, model planes, a go-kart that sat in the garage for 3 years in various states of incompletion. As an adult, the projects got larger, and the incompletion got more expensive. A landscaping business that dissolved after 1 season. A food truck concept that never got past the planning stage. A real estate investment partnership that ended in a disagreement significant enough that he still did not speak to the other partner 6 years later. The Veterans Foundation was the one that actually launched, and I think that surprised Kevin more than anyone. He had attended a community fundraiser for a local veterans organization about 3 years after my injury and come home talking about it with more energy than I had seen from him in a long time. Within 6 months, he had registered a nonprofit, built a website, and begun soliciting donations from church contacts and neighborhood networks and people he had gone to high school with. I was glad for him. I want to say that clearly. The work of supporting veterans transitioning out of service, helping families navigate the systems, raising awareness about injury and mental health and the particular invisible costs of military life, that work matters. There are people doing it honestly and well and making a real difference. Kevin was trying to do it honestly. I believe that. He just needed a better story than he had, and he knew where the best story was. The first time he used my name without asking me was subtle enough that I almost missed it. His foundation newsletter, sent to a few hundred donors, included a section about the personal connections that had inspired the organization. He mentioned growing up with a sister who served. He mentioned her injuries. He did not name me directly. He described the day he found out about the explosion, and the weeks he spent not knowing exactly what my condition was, and the moment he saw me for the first time afterward. A friend of mine who received the newsletter forwarded it with a note that said she had not known Kevin ran a veterans organization and thought it was wonderful. I called Kevin. I told him I would prefer he not use details about my injury in his fundraising materials without talking to me first. He said he had not used my name. I said he had described me specifically enough that anyone who knew us would know who he meant. He said he was just sharing his own experience of having a family member who served. I said his experience and my injury were not the same thing, and I needed him to understand the difference. He said he understood. He did not understand. The newsletter became a donor thank you letter that mentioned his sister's sacrifice in Iraq. The thank you letter became a grant application that referenced a family member's combat injury as part of the founder's founding motivation. The grant application became a fundraising video posted online in which Kevin spoke directly to a camera for 4 minutes about the moment he learned I had lost my arm, describing it in the kind of careful emotional detail that fundraising videos require and that I had never once asked him to put into the world on my behalf. I did not see the video until it had been up for 6 weeks. It had been viewed several thousand times. Several donors had left comments beneath it about Kevin's courage in sharing something so personal. One comment said his story had made them cry and they were proud to support the foundation. His story. I watched the 4 minutes twice. I recognized the details because they were mine: the location, the unit, the nature of the injury, the timeline of my recovery. Things I had told my family in private, in the months after it happened, when I was still putting myself back together and trusting the people closest to me with the parts I was not ready to show anyone else. Kevin had taken those parts and built a fundraising asset out of them. I called him that night. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, which told me he was either genuinely glad to hear from me or had been expecting this particular call. I asked him when he had planned to tell me about the video. He said he thought I would be proud. I told him proud was not the word I was using. He said he was raising money for veterans. He said the foundation helped real people. He said the work mattered and he needed people to understand why it mattered, and my story was the truest explanation of why it mattered that he had. I said, "It is not your story to use." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You never use it yourself. Someone should." I want to sit with that sentence for a moment because I think it explains something important about the way people justify borrowing other people's pain. The logic goes like this. You have something valuable. You are not using it. I could use it well. Therefore, the borrowing is not theft, it is stewardship. The problem with that logic is that it removes the person from their own experience entirely. It treats what happened to me as a resource to be managed rather than a life to be lived. Kevin did not ask himself why I had chosen not to share my story publicly. He asked himself what good could come from sharing it and then made the decision on my behalf. That is not generosity. That is appropriation dressed in a charitable intention. I told him to take the video down. He said he would think about it. He did not take it down. The photograph was 3 months after the video conversation. The barbecue photograph. My arm on his website under a caption about resilience. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon from my physical therapist's link with no message. I called Kevin and he did not pick up. I called again and he did not pick up. I sent a text that said, "Take the photograph down today." He replied 20 minutes later, "Can we talk about this?" I wrote back, "There is nothing to talk about. Take it down." He wrote, "I think you are being oversensitive about something that helps people." I put the phone down on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a moment. Oversensitive. That word specifically. About a photograph of my own body taken without my knowledge, posted without my consent, used to raise money for an organization that bore no formal connection to my service record or my authorization. I picked the phone back up. I called the Virginia office of the State Attorney General's Charitable Solicitation Division and asked a very specific question about the legal requirements for using a living individual's image and personal medical history in nonprofit fundraising materials without their written consent. The woman I spoke with was helpful and specific. Then I called a veterans legal assistance clinic I had used once before for a different matter. I spoke to an attorney named Sandra Park who had handled nonprofit compliance cases and asked her 3 more specific questions. She asked if I wanted to move forward formally. I told her I wanted to understand my options first. She told me my options. I thanked her and hung up and made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table for about 40 minutes thinking about what I actually wanted the outcome of this to be. Here is what I knew about Kevin underneath the anger. He loved me. I have never doubted that. He was in the waiting room at Walter Reed for 11 days straight after I was brought stateside. He slept in a chair, he ate vending machine food, he called our parents every few hours. When I was finally well enough to see visitors, he walked into my room and looked at me for a long time without saying anything and then said, "You look terrible." I said, "I know." He said, "You're going to be okay." I said, "I know that too." He cried in the hallway afterward. Our mother told me later. He stood in the hallway outside my room and cried for about 10 minutes and then composed himself and came back in and asked if I wanted him to change the channel. That man was the same man who posted the photograph. People are not one thing. That is the part that makes situations like this genuinely hard rather than simply infuriating. The person causing you harm is also a person who loved you through one of the worst experiences of your life. You cannot cleanly separate those 2 facts. You have to hold them at the same time and make decisions anyway. 2 weeks after the photograph appeared, I drove to Kevin's house on a Saturday morning. He lived in a brick colonial in a Northern Virginia suburb, the kind of neighborhood where all the houses looked slightly too large for the lives happening inside them. His car was in the driveway. He answered the door in sweatpants and a flannel shirt, holding a coffee mug, and for a second he looked genuinely happy to see me, the reflexive happiness of an older brother who has not seen his sister in a few months and has not yet remembered what she is probably here about. Then he remembered. His expression shifted into something more careful. I said I wanted to come in. He stepped back and let me through. We sat in his kitchen. He made more coffee. He offered me something to eat. This is how our family handles difficult conversations, through the ritual of hospitality, the making and offering of food and drink as a way of establishing that whatever comes next happens between people who care about each other. I accepted the coffee. I waited until we were both sitting. Then I said, "Kevin, I need you to hear something and I need you to actually hear it, not prepare your response while I am still talking." He nodded. I said, "When that bomb went off outside Fallujah, I was the one inside the vehicle. I was the one who treated Marcus while I was still bleeding myself. I was the one who woke up 3 days later and had to be told what my left arm looked like now. I was the one who spent 8 months learning how to do the things I had been doing my whole life with a body that was significantly different from the one I started with. That experience is mine. Every photograph of it, every description of it, every emotional detail of it belongs to me. Not to the foundation, not to your fundraising calendar, not to a donor thank you letter. To me." Kevin looked at his coffee cup. I said, "You have been using my injury as a fundraising asset for over 2 years without my knowledge or my consent. You have put photographs of my body on the internet without asking me. You have described my medical history to strangers who gave you money, partly because of how my story made them feel. And every time I have asked you to stop, you have told me you were helping and that I was being oversensitive and then continued doing it." He said, "Diane." I said, "Let me finish." He closed his mouth. I said, "I have spoken to an attorney. I have spoken to the State Charitable Solicitation Office. Using an identifiable living individual's medical history and personal image in fundraising materials without written authorization creates specific legal exposure for a registered nonprofit. That is not a threat. It is information. What I am asking you to do is remove every piece of content that references my injury, my service record, or my physical appearance from your foundation materials within 10 days. I am asking you to do it because it is the right thing to do, but I also want you to know there are formal channels available to me if you choose not to. The kitchen was very quiet, a clock on the wall ticked. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn 2 houses down. Kevin set his coffee cup on the table. He said, "I never meant to hurt you." I said, "I know that." He said, "I thought I was honoring what you went through." I said, "Honoring something requires the permission of the person it happened to." He looked up at me. His eyes were red at the edges, the way they got when he was genuinely upset rather than defensively upset. He said, "I don't know how to talk about why I do this work without talking about you." I said, "Then learn. Because the foundation should stand on what it does, not on what happened to my arm." He nodded slowly. It was the nod of someone who had heard something true and was in the process of deciding whether to accept it. I picked up my coffee cup and took a sip and waited. After a long moment, he said, 10 days. I said, 10 days. He took the content down in 6. Not all of it immediately. Some pieces required him to contact a web developer and a grant database administrator, but he moved through it methodically and sent me a message each time something was removed. Short messages, just newsletter updated, grant application revised, video taken down, photograph removed. No apology in any of them. I noticed that. I thought about whether it bothered me and decided it did not because an apology would not have been appropriate, but because the actions were what mattered and the actions were happening. On the 7th day he called me. I answered. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about learning to talk about the work without using your story." I waited. He said, "I think I have been doing it wrong for a while. Not just with your stuff, the whole approach. Like I was more interested in making people feel something than in actually explaining what the foundation does." I said, "That is a reasonable thing to notice." He said, "I'm going to redesign the whole site. Focus on the programs, the outcomes, the actual veterans we have helped. Numbers and names and real results instead of someone's worst day." I said, "That sounds like the right direction." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Diane. I should have asked. A long time ago, I should have just asked." There it was. I sat with it for a second. Not performing consideration. Actually sitting with it because apologies from older siblings who have done something genuinely wrong carry a specific weight and deserve a moment. I said, "Yes, you should have." Then I said, "But I think you understand now." He said he thought so too. The foundation restructured its public materials over the following months. I know because Kevin sent me the revised website link without comment, and I looked through it. The new version was more restrained, more specific, more honest about what the organization actually did, and less focused on creating an emotional reaction through borrowed pain. There was a page about programs, a page about outcomes, testimonials from veterans who had consented to share their own stories in their own words. It was better. Genuinely better. It looked like an organization that deserved to exist. My arm was not in it anywhere. I closed the browser and went back to what I had been doing. I want to say something about the injury itself because I think it has been the background of this entire story, and I have not addressed it directly, and that feels like an omission. Losing part of my left arm changed my life in specific practical ways that I adapted to. It did not end my military career. It did not end my sense of myself as a capable person. It did not become the central fact of my identity, the thing everything else organized itself around. People expected it to be that. People expected me to be defined by the loss, to be primarily a person to whom something terrible had happened. Strangers sometimes looked at my arm and then at my face with an expression of such concentrated sympathy that I wanted to hand them a pamphlet explaining that I was fine and had been for some time. What happened in Fallujah was real, and it cost me something real. I carry it. I will carry it the rest of my life. But I decide what it means and how much space it takes up and who gets access to the details of it. That is the thing Kevin took without asking. Not just the image, the authority to decide how my own story got told. I needed it back. I got it back. That is the whole thing. I ran into Kevin at our parents' anniversary dinner in the spring. Large family gathering, my mother's good tablecloth, my father attempting to give a toast that went slightly too long and made everyone smile for the right reasons. Kevin and I sat across from each other. We talked about normal things, his kids, my work, a trip our parents were planning. He asked how my knee was doing. I had had a minor procedure in the winter, and I told him it was fine. He said good. At one point during the main course, he looked over at me and said quietly, just to me, under the general noise of the table, "The foundation placed 11 veterans in job training programs last quarter. I thought you might want to know." I said, "That is good work, Kevin." He nodded and reached for the bread basket. That was it. That was the whole exchange. But it was a different kind of sentence than the ones we had been saying to each other for 2 years. It was a sentence about what the work actually was, not about what my injury made people feel. It was evidence that something had shifted. I ate my dinner. Outside the restaurant windows, the spring evening was doing what spring evenings do in Virginia, going soft at the edges, the light staying longer than you expect it to. I thought about a lot of things at once, the way you do at family dinners when you are quiet inside a loud room. I thought about the bench by the river where I had sat the night I found the photograph. I thought about Marcus in Ohio, with his 2 children and his annual Christmas card. I thought about the medic training I had done before my first deployment, a sergeant who told our class that the most important thing in the field was not technique but presence, being fully present to what was actually happening rather than what you feared was happening. I thought that presence was probably what Kevin had been missing all along. He had been reacting to his fear of what happened to me rather than being present to who I actually was. Maybe that was true of a lot of people who loved someone through something terrible. The event became the thing they held on to. The person in front of them, changed and continuing and capable and still there, became harder to see. I am not a person to whom something terrible happened. I am a person who was in a vehicle outside Fallujah on a specific morning and made a series of decisions in the time available and came home and rebuilt and kept going. That is the accurate version. The injury is one part of it, one true and significant part. But my arm does not belong to anyone's fundraising calendar. My story does not belong to anyone's website. My worst day does not belong to anyone's donor thank you letter. These things belong to me. They always did. The only thing that changed is that now other people know it too. If you stayed with me through all of this, thank you. I know it is not the kind of story with a clean villain or a dramatic resolution. Kevin was not a predator. He was a brother who loved me and had poor boundaries and needed to be told clearly and with some force what those boundaries were. I told him. He heard me. And in the end, the foundation does better work now than it did before. Real work. Work that stands on its own results instead of on the worst day of his sister's life. I did not win anything. I just reclaimed something that was always mine. My story, my arm, my choice about how both of those things get seen. That is enough. For me, it has always been more than enough.